Imagine a car that's been everywhere. Not just everywhere like the grocery store and back, but everywhere like the Sahara Desert, the dense Amazon rainforest, and the front lines of actual wars. A car so iconic that for millions of people in remote villages, it was the first motorized vehicle they ever saw. But today, that same legend is a $100,000 luxury status symbol parked in front of high-end boutiques. How did a farm tool made of scrap aluminum become the most recognizable 4x4 on the planet? And more importantly, is it actually a good car or just a very expensive headache waiting to happen? Stick around because we're diving into the dirty, gritty, and surprisingly posh history of the Land Rover Defender. It's 1947. Britain is still reeling from World War II. Steel is rationed, the economy is in shambles, and the Rover Car Company is basically one bad month away from disappearing forever. Maurice Wilkes, the chief engineer, is sitting on a beach in Wales on his summer holiday. He has an old surplus Willys Jeep from the war and he loves it, but it's breaking down. He needs a replacement that can farm, haul, and drive on roads, but there's nothing on the market. The problem? He can't just buy one. There are no British 4x4s. And Rover won't give him the budget to build a whole new car from scratch because they don't think anyone wants a workhorse vehicle. Maurice is literally standing on the sand, sketching a rough outline of a boxy vehicle with a stick. He tells his brother, "We build this or we go bust." But they have no steel. They have no fancy factory. All they have is a pile of leftover aircraft aluminum and some green paint meant for fighter jet cockpits. That sketch in the sand became the Series 1 Land Rover. Because steel was scarce, they used Burma-Bright, an aluminum alloy, which meant the car didn't rust like other cars of the era. They painted it cockpit green because it was the only surplus paint they had. It was meant to be a stopgap for 2 or 3 years until the economy recovered. Instead, it was so successful that it saved the company and stayed in production in some form for nearly 70 years. By the 1950s, the Land Rover wasn't just for farmers. It was becoming the go-to choice for explorers. In 1955, 6 students from Oxford and Cambridge decided they wanted to do something that had never been done: drive from London to Singapore. Most people thought they'd die in the first month. They were driving through places that didn't have roads. We're talking about crossing the jungle, fording rivers without bridges, and navigating mountain passes in the Himalayas where one wrong turn meant falling 1,000 feet. They were using Series 1 Land Rovers with 50 horsepower engines. To put that in perspective, a modern lawn tractor has more power. Every time the car broke down, which was often, they had to fix it with whatever they had on hand, usually in the middle of a monsoon or a desert. They actually made it. They arrived in Singapore after 6 months, proving to the world that if you wanted to go to the ends of the earth, you took a Land Rover. This expedition cemented the Defender's ancestor as the ultimate go-anywhere machine. It's why even today, the UN and Red Cross use Defenders for humanitarian missions in the most dangerous places on Earth. It wasn't just a car, it was a survival tool. If you look at the very first prototypes of the Land Rover, you'll notice something incredibly weird. The steering wheel isn't on the left, it isn't on the right, it's right in the dead center, like a McLaren F1. Why would they do this? Was it for better visibility when plowing fields? Was it a secret racing technique? No. It was because Land Rover wanted to sell the car to the whole world, but they didn't want to spend money making 2 different versions for left-hand drive and right-hand drive markets. They thought, if we put it in the middle, everyone wins. It turned out nobody won. Farmers hated it because it was awkward to get in and out of, and there was no room for a passenger. Land Rover quickly realized their mistake and moved the wheel to the side for the production models. But that center steer prototype is now one of the most legendary ghost cars in automotive history. It shows just how much the Defender was born out of pure, desperate pragmatism. For decades, the car wasn't even called the Defender. It was just the Land Rover Series 1, 2, or 3, or later, the 90 and 110, based on the length of the wheelbase in inches. But by the late 1980s, Land Rover had a problem. They had launched the Discovery and the Range Rover, and people were getting confused. The original boxy workhorse was starting to look like a dinosaur. It was loud, it leaked when it rained, and it was about as aerodynamic as a refrigerator.
Sales were dipping because people wanted SUVs that didn't feel like tractors. Land Rover needed to give their old car a new identity to protect its legacy against the new kids on the block. In 1990, they officially gave it the name Defender. It was a genius marketing move. Suddenly, it wasn't just an old truck. It was the defender of the brand's heritage. This name change gave the car a second wind, turning it from a utility vehicle into a cult icon that celebrities and collectors started to crave.
How does a car that's basically a box on wheels become cool? It started with the military and royalty. Queen Elizabeth II was famously obsessed with them. She was a mechanic in the war, and she was often seen driving herself around her estates in a muddy Defender, wearing a headscarf. But cool usually implies something sleek and fast, right? The Defender is neither. It's slow, the heater barely works, and the door seals are more like suggestions for keeping the water out. Yet Hollywood fell in love. James Bond drove them in Spectre and No Time to Die. Angelina Jolie's Lara Croft had a custom 110 in Tomb Raider. The tension between its rugged, I don't care about luxury attitude and its high price tag created a paradox. It became the ultimate stealth wealth vehicle. If you drive a Ferrari, people think you're showing off. If you drive a classic beat-up Defender 90, people think you have an estate in the English countryside and a secret life as an adventurer. It's the only car that looks equally at home at a 5-star hotel and a muddy construction site.
We have to talk about the reliability elephant in the room. If you've ever scrolled through a Land Rover forum, you've seen the memes. If there's no oil under it, there's no oil in it. Land Rover has let's call it a complicated relationship with reliability. The classic Defenders were mechanically simple, but they were built by hand in a factory that wasn't always known for surgical precision. Owners dealt with electrical gremlins that could make the headlights turn off for no reason in the middle of the night. Rust was a constant battle, especially on the frame. Owners loved the car despite the fact that it required a toolkit and a prayer every time you went on a long trip. The payoff here is a bit ironic. Because the cars were so quirky, a massive community formed around them. Owning a Defender is like being in a support group. There is a whole industry of aftermarket parts, like galvanized chassis that won't rust, and modern engine swaps that allow you to keep these things on the road forever. The unreliability actually created the legend, because only true enthusiasts were willing to put up with it.
In 2016, the old Defender finally died. Safety and emissions regulations meant the old boxy shape just couldn't continue. Fans were devastated. For 4 years, there was no Defender. Then, in 2020, Land Rover dropped the new Defender. Purists hated it at first. "It's too soft," they cried. "It has too many computers. You can't fix it with a hammer anymore." They hated that it had independent suspension instead of solid axles. They feared that Land Rover had turned their rugged hero into a mall crawler for suburban families who were afraid of dirt. Then people actually drove it. It turns out the new Defender is a beast. It can wade through nearly 3 feet of water. It has cameras that let you see through the hood to the rocks below. And it's actually comfortable to drive on the highway at 80 miles per hour, something the old one could never do without making your ears bleed. It managed to bridge the gap between being a genuine off-road weapon and a luxury daily driver. It's not the old Defender, but it's arguably the most capable vehicle Land Rover has ever built.
Before we wrap up, we have to mention that Land Rover engineers are a little bit insane. Over the years, they've tried to make the Defender do things no car should do. In the 50s, they made a version with tank tracks instead of wheels, called the Cuthbertson, for driving over bogs. They made monster truck versions for the Forestry Commission. But the craziest? The floating Defender. They actually built a Defender 90 with inflatable pontoons and a propeller at the back. It actually worked. They drove it across the Highland Lakes in Scotland. It wasn't exactly a speedboat, but it proved the point. The Defender is a modular Lego set for grown-ups. If you can dream of a place to go, someone has probably modified a Defender to get there.
Think about the engineering for a second. The classic Defender 110 has a turning circle about the size of a small moon. Trying to park one in a tight city garage is like trying to navigate a cargo ship into a bathtub. You're sweating, the manual steering is giving you a workout, and everyone is staring at you. But then you take that same car to a muddy trail that would swallow a modern crossover whole. The low-range gears engage with a heavy mechanical clunk, the tires bite into the earth, and suddenly that clunky truck feels like it's in its natural habitat. The tension of the terrible road car disappears the second the pavement ends. That's the payoff. It's a vehicle that demands you compromise on comfort so it can give you total freedom. And then there's the price. If you want a pristine 1990s Defender 90 in the United States today, you're looking at $70, $80, maybe even $100,000 for a car with no airbags, no power windows, and the aerodynamics of a brick. Why? Because you can't buy soul in a showroom. People are paying for the feeling of being an explorer. They're paying for the sound of that diesel engine and the way the door shuts with a metallic ping that sounds like a locker room door. The modern Defender, while much more expensive and tech-heavy, tries to capture that same feeling. It has exposed screw heads in the interior and rubber floors you can literally hose out after a weekend in the mud. It's the payoff of decades of branding, making a luxury buyer want a car that feels like a tool.
The Land Rover Defender is one of those rare things that shouldn't exist in the modern world. It's a relic of a time when cars were tools, not gadgets. Whether you love the old, leaky, rattling classic or the high-tech, air-suspended modern version, there's no denying its impact. It's the car that explored the world when there were no maps. It's a piece of history you can still drive today. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the world's most iconic 4x4, do us a huge favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us keep making these videos. Also, let us know in the comments, if you had to pick one, would you take the classic 110 or the brand new V8 Defender? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.